Merry Christmas Eve, folks, and welcome back to WWE Network and Show, where I, Graham G.S. Matthews, break down all the original content I watch on the WWE Network and on Peacock. And today we're talking the latest episode of Broken Skull Sessions with Stone Cold Steve Austin and a special guest this month, Diamond Dallas Page. This episode first went live last Sunday on December 19th, the last one for the year. And it seems like, unlike the rest of the Peacock content with WWE, it seems like they've been fairly consistent with the Broken Skull Sessions over the last 12 months. They haven't done exactly one every month in 2021, but it sure seems like it. They did Sasha or Bayley maybe late last year. Drew, I think, was last December. But in 2021 alone, we've got Mick Foley. That was in June, I think, to commemorate the anniversary, I think, of his debut or the Hell in the Cell match or whatever, around the Hell in the Cell pay-per-view. I think they eventually did the Kevin Nash one. I'm pretty sure they ended up putting that up a little bit later on. Nash, I think, was on. Definitely Mick Foley. They did Randy Orton at one point, I think, in March. That was a great episode. They did Chris Jericho over WrestleMania season. That was fantastic. Jeff Hardy, obviously, just last month. Seth Rollins in September was great. Bobby Lashley in August was awesome. So they've had a lot of really good episodes. By far the best WWE show on Peacock in 2021 since they made the move over back in March. But this was another very enjoyable episode. A lot of the same stories you've probably heard before if you've read DDP's book, if you watched a lot of his documentaries, and even some of like the Karl Malone, Dennis Rodman stuff. WWE did a whole feature on that as part of WWE Untold about a year or two ago. And that was great. And they retell a lot of the same stories here. But it's very enjoyable. A great conversation between two longtime friends in Steve and DDP. So to kind of kick off the episode here, DDP recalls Austin actually attacking him during the invasion back in the summer of 2001. It was the episode where Austin had seemingly aligned with Team WWF, only to rejoin or join or whatever the alliance a short time later at the Invasion pay-per-view. Because DDP was like, oh yeah, you've kicked my ass a few times here and there and all this other stuff. And Austin was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure it was when we did that whole Invasion angle back in 2001. But anyway, I guess DDP was one of the few people that Steve Austin had actually rode with during the course of their career, starting in WCW and then a little bit later on, maybe in WWE. I'm not 100% sure, but definitely during their time in WCW. And Dallas actually tells a story about carrying Austin to his hotel room. And it was like a cookie story, I think. Or that came a little bit later on. I think Steve had passed out or something, and then DDP carried him to his room on more than one occasion. Back in 2004, DDP was going through a divorce, and he moved to Los Angeles around that time. And he actually moved in with Steve. I think he and his wife divorced. Steve had inquired about moving to LA with him or whatever. So Steve Austin took him up on his offer, and he joined the open room. DDP called him a slob. He said he was very used to his wife Kimberly being a neat freak and all this other stuff. So Steve was not the cleanest person, I guess. He also tells a story about Steve passing out on the couch or whatever, and having cookies and chocolate chips all around him, and he had to kind of lure him into his bed with cookies, which was a pretty funny story. I don't do it justice by talking about it here. But Steve tells a story about driving down the road one day and seeing some guy in his pajamas pushing a barbecue grill up the road to their apartment, and it was DDP. So that's a great visual as well. To kind of go back all the way to his early beginnings in the wrestling business, he started a bar business in Jersey and then another one in Florida soon after. He had been doing the running clubs and whatever since he was 23 years old, did DDP. They rewatched one of his promos from the AWA, very talented, very charismatic, all this other stuff. And he took pictures with all the wrestlers that came through his clubs because he was a big wrestling fan growing up. Didn't know a lot about the business, but was enough of a fan to know who these people were. Specifically, people like Captain Lou Albano, someone that really kind of inspired him to join the business, that had a major effect on his career, which we'll get to in a second. He really wished that he could have been a part of the rock and wrestling era. He had initially started training, I guess, when he was younger, but he hurt his knee, so he started to shift his focus to running clubs, and he was just kind of that wildcat that enjoyed that lifestyle at that point. But, we kind of fantasized about what if I was in wrestling, what would my name be? And it would have been originally Handsome Dallas Page. And someone had told him, hey, you probably should move away from that name, I think jokingly. So he ended up coming up with the moniker of Diamond Dallas Page. And that way he could have the Diamond Exchange, like he could have the Diamond Dolls, and the Diamond Exchange is like a faction, which reminded me of the Diamond Mine, currently in NXT. I guess a cable company did a feature on him and his radio work and called him The Voice. And it ended up landing him a gig with a guy named Smitty, who wanted DDP on his radio show with him as like the wrestling expert. And Dallas was like, listen, I know nothing about wrestling. I'm not in the business. And he's like, it doesn't really matter. Like, I just want someone to kind of be on the show helping me talk to these wrestlers. And he kind of lured him in by convincing him, saying, hey, I'm going to have Captain Lou on my show. And DDP was like, holy shit, like, Captain Lou? And he's like, yeah. And he's like, oh shit, can I talk to him? And he's like, yeah, absolutely. And he says it's all a matter of who, not who you know in the business, but it's more a matter of who is willing to say they know you. And Smitty had told DDP, listen, you got what it takes, I think, to be a wrestler. You really should send this guy named Rob a tape. He was one of the head honchos of the AWA. And DDP didn't really know what to do because he wasn't, experienced at all in wrestling. So he's like, send a tape of what? You know what I mean? So he ended up sending a tape to the AWA guys after filming like a video of himself and a bunch of guys, like a bunch of the people from his bar, club lifestyle that were also not wrestlers, but he kind of convinced the people at the AWA that they were. I guess it was just him cutting a bunch of promos. It wasn't him working matches, that's for sure. So Rob ended up calling him back. And he was like, hey, we really liked your tape. No one really knows who you are or where you're coming from, but we would love you in Vegas for a tryout. And TDP's like, well, the problem is that we're not actually wrestlers. And then Rob said, then why the hell would you send in a tape? He's like, well, because I thought I had a shot. You know what I mean? It's a secret society. I don't know how to get in otherwise. So it was actually Greg Gagne that gave him a shot at managing some guys. Even though he didn't have his other, posse with him because they weren't actually wrestlers, he was at least able to get a shot himself. And AWA called him at just the right time, and the only reason they gave him a gig was because Paul Heyman had just left to go do other stuff, so they needed a manager, and he was that guy. He gave a lot of praise to Medusa, called her a trailblazer. She's really close with her, I guess. He talks about meeting, I think, Dusty around the age of 31. That was the first time he'd interacted with Dusty Rhodes. And he said that he needed him and Jake Roberts to get where he ended up getting. And had it not been for those two, he would have never been a success. They got him in touch, or I think Dusty got him in touch with Gordon Soley. Dusty at that point had gone to WWF. And when he was in WWF, he got DDP a tryout to be an announcer. And we actually see the footage of him and Lord Alfred Hayes. And I think I don't know if he was ribbing him on purpose, he was just interrupting him on purpose, I don't know, but it was not great, but it was great footage though. Like the tryout itself clearly did not earn him a job there, but the footage itself was amazing, and I'm glad they showed it here. That was fantastic. So it was around that point that he wanted to get out of the bar business. AWA was gone, Florida Championship Wrestling was gone. He didn't know what to do with wrestling. He wasn't doing anything in wrestling. He really had no gigs at that point, and he wasn't happy doing the bar business thing. He wanted to be in wrestling full time. So thankfully, Dusty ended up going back to WCW, hired him in WCW. He couldn't tell him, hey, I'm going back at that point, but he did say, listen, instead of moving to here with your wife Kim, you might want to move to Atlanta instead. And that was when he hired him to WCW. So Dusty put him in with the Freebirds, had to manage the Freebirds or something along those lines. And on a long car ride one time, I forgot who he said was driving, but Michael Hayes was also in the car, 3-hour car ride, and he ended up drinking. He ended up becoming drinking buddies with Michael P.S. Hayes, and they formed a bond through that. And in the first promo they were put with together, like the first segment or vignette or whatever, Michael Hayes really wanted to let DDP shine and had him talk for the entire promo. So like DDP is this newbie on the block, and Michael Hayes, one of the better talkers of that era, let DDP, give him all the shine, really wanted to put him over, which was really cool. A short time later, Magnum TA actually told Dallas, listen, we can't have you manage anyone anymore. And he was taken aback by this. He's like, why not? And he's like, it's because you take too much away from the other performers. You got the cigar, you got the glasses, you're loud, you're charismatic, and we like you. But the people are starting to pay more attention to you and not the people in the ring, and that's a problem. They let him do occasional commentary, but he couldn't do managing anymore. So Dallas realizes, all right, I got 7 months left in my contract, what do I do? My only shot in wrestling is if I become a wrestler. So he thought he would spend the next 7 months of his contract going to the power plant learning how to wrestle. And again, his career would have been over otherwise. So he told the Freebirds about this, they laughed in his face, because the guy at this point was 36 years old. It wasn't like he was a spring chicken, you know what I mean? So he committed to it. And it was only 3 weeks that he spent at the power plant before he got on the road, before they put him on the road doing matches. Why it was 3 weeks, I don't know. Maybe they thought he learned enough, I'm not exactly sure. But he had his debut match. I don't know if it was on TV or not, but Tony Schiavone saw it and told him that it was one of the best debut matches he had ever actually seen. The best first match he had seen anyone have up to that point. And he said, "You're good. You're very good for someone who had just had their first match. If you're this good in 6 months, you'll suck, but you got to continue to improve, and you got the basics down." So he talks about traveling with Kevin Nash and Steve Austin and having a great time being on the road. He loved doing that stuff. He actually taped all of his own matches with a camcorder so he could watch it back, learn what he could improve upon and stuff like that, which was cool. That footage, unfortunately, doesn't exist today because he would tape over all those matches, being a cheapskate, a lot like Steve, would not want to go out and get new footage, so he would just tape over the old footage. So it unfortunately doesn't exist anymore. But he talks about suffering a career-ending injury at that point. I think it was a shoulder injury. I forgot exactly what he said it was. But it was during which point that he became very close with Jake Roberts. Jake, at that point, was going through a divorce. He was living in a hotel. DDP asked his wife, Kim, "Hey, would you mind if Jake moves in with us?" So it was at that point that Jake, let DDP travel with him on the road. He went on the road and then really allowed him to learn a lot from the business, not from wrestling, but just kind of sitting under the learning tree of Jake Roberts. He also watched his matches with him and stuff like that, and he said, "You're going to learn more from psychology from doing this than you will in the ring. From me, analyzing your matches than you will in the ring, I promise you." And it ended up working. He tells a story about how Jake lost his Cobra in the house one time. They ended up finding it under the vanity, but Jake was like, "Oh yeah, no, it'll come out on its own," and then he left for 3 days, and I guess that was the end of Jake Roberts living with DDP and Kim. I don't know if it was that reason specifically, but it sounded like that played a factor because they couldn't have wild snakes roaming around the house when Jake wasn't home. That just sounds terrifying. So Bischoff ended up telling DDP, "Hey, listen, lose the glasses and lose the cigar." And DDP was, again, baffled as to why he would tell him to do that. And he's like, "Listen, lose all the gimmicks and be yourself. That's what's really going to get you over." And he was right. The diamond cutter was really what got him over. He would execute it so well. It was an innovative maneuver, such a great move. And that's what he ended up going with. And he would give his enhancement talents a lot, and then he would hit him with the move, and the crowd would go crazy. They rewatched the DDP turning on the NWO segment, a really hot, memorable segment from that time in WCW history when Nash and Hall offered him a spot in the NWO, gave him a shirt. I think he put the shirt on, and then he hits Hall out of nowhere with the diamond cutter. Takes the shirt off, dumps Nash out of the ring, kind of ducks him, and Nash goes flying, fucking flips the table over. Thankfully, no one was hurt on that. It's a great moment. It's great footage that they replayed here. And he actually said that was his idea. Months earlier, they were doing nothing with him. He actually almost asked for his release. But he pitched that idea. He told it to Scott Hall. Scott Hall loved the idea. He's like, "Oh, go tell it to Bischoff." And he's like, "I'm not telling Bischoff that idea. He's not going to like it." So someone important's got to tell him, whether it be me or Nash or somebody. Someone's got to tell him that idea, and it can't be me. So they ended up running with it, obviously. He and Randy Savage, when they worked together in 97, 98, they wanted to have the best matches possible. It was actually Savage that wanted to work with DDP, he says, which is really cool, obviously. And he actually told Dallas, "Listen, I want to take your finisher, yeah." I can't do the Macho Man impression. I can't do the Macho Man voice. I don't know if anyone really can. I mean, actually, there's a couple people that can. Dan Soder, I think his name is. He does a great Macho Man impression, but and Jay Lethal as well, obviously. But anyway, so Randy had told him, "Listen, I want to take your finisher." And he was like, holy shit. So they actually tested it out, I think at a couple house shows, and it was from that point forward that DDP was seen as a star. That Randy Savage was like kicking out of his finisher and whatever. That's a big deal. So we worked with Randy quite a bit. They worked at Spring Stampede, I think, in 97 or 98. Definitely Halloween Havoc one of those years. Definitely 97 he worked with us. So probably for the better part in 97 they worked together. It wasn't 98 because in 98 DDP worked with Goldberg. But they worked a lot that year. Always had good matches. And he tells a story, and I've heard this before. I don't know if it was on Steve Austin's podcast or his other podcast that he had for years on Podcast One or somewhere else. But he told the story here about how around Thanksgiving, people were hitting him up, and a lot of people he helped get jobs were thanking him and saying, "Oh, I'm so thankful for you, blah, blah, blah." And DDP was like, "Oh, who am I thankful for that doesn't already know that? Like Jake knows it, Dusty knows it. Probably not Randy, so let me give him a buzz." And again, you've probably heard this story before, but called Randy. Randy didn't pick up, left him a message telling him how much he meant to him and how much he was grateful to him and thankful for him and whatever. Randy doesn't call back. Fast forward to the following Monday at the TV tapings, Randy calls DDP into his office, all fired up and intense and whatever, and he says, "Yeah, I got your message, yeah." and then does the whole spiel and says that really meant a lot because I guess not a lot of people thanked him or his dad, Angelo Poffo, I forgot his name, but that wasn't really a common thing back then. So the fact that DDP did that to Randy meant a lot to Randy, and he gave him a hug, and he gets kind of emotional, DDP does, talking about it. And I would too. I mean, the guy's not here anymore, and I'm sure he misses him. But that's a really cool story. So anyway, they talk about the Karl Malone, Dennis Rodman stuff, calls Karl Malone a special cat. Asked Malone if he wanted to wrestle because Malone was a big wrestling fan. He said, I might consider it. They shot an angle for it on The Tonight Show when it was Dennis Rodman and Hogan versus Malone and DDP in a tag team match. That was all DDP's idea. And Austin talks about like, oh yeah, we got Mike Tyson involved, but stupid me thinking originally we didn't need Mike Tyson, not looking at the bigger picture. I mean, thankfully they used Tyson anyway, and not at the discretion of Austin that like, oh yeah, well, let's not use him because he said so. You know what I mean? No pun intended. But yeah, DDP didn't realize the business they would bring and calls them amazing athletes. They then rewatched DDP versus Goldberg from Halloween Havoc 1998. Fantastic match. Arguably Goldberg's greatest match ever. And he talks about how he wanted to dodge the spear. Goldberg said no. He was a very real-based wrestler. And that everything he did had to be real. And that wasn't too real to him. But he's like, listen, it's going to work. And it was a good spot. And they did it. They talk about the cutter, like the reversal from the power slam into the cutter and how Goldberg was passed out at that point, but they still executed it perfectly anyway. One of the most memorable counters of all time. It's amazing. And it was cool for him to be in that spot because that was the same show. They actually headlined over Hogan and Warrior, which was not for the championship. That was just a rematch from WrestleMania 6, and it was fucking terrible. But the cool thing about it was that DDP actually drove a Cadillac to the ring at WrestleMania 6, not for Hogan or Warrior, but on that same show. So the fact that he actually headlined over those two guys on the same show all these years later, in 98 at Halloween Havoc, was a big deal. Obviously, as the story goes, their time got cut off. They went overtime due to Hogan and Warrior, so they actually had to replay the match the next night because the third of their pay-per-view audience didn't see the match. They lost a lot of money on that, replaying the pay-per-view, that match anyway, that main event, for free on Nitro. But that was actually, I believe, according to Austin, the final time WCW beat WWE in the ratings from Nitro to Raw, which I did not know. So the last time Raw lost in the ratings to WCW was when they had replayed that match from Halloween Havoc in 98, which, again, I did not know. I thought that was really cool. So anyway, they talk about and show the footage of him winning his first WCW World Heavyweight Championship at Spring Stampede. Excuse me, quite the mouthful, I think. Spring Stampede 1999. And then they talk about the Monday Night Wars. He didn't think there was any heat, that he had any heat with anyone in WWE. And he really didn't, but it was more about the heat between WWE and WCW. And Dusty had told Dallas, listen, take the money, sit home, and come in with the rest of us. And he was like, I want to, but like he calls himself kind of a Vince McMahon mark and a wrestling mark, but it's like, he has a good point. He was 45 at the time, was DDP. This was really his last shot. He didn't know how much he had left in him, so you might as well strike when the iron was hot. And then when he first comes in, Shane was in the same room as DDP and Kim when he told him about the stalker angle, and he's like, well, this is fucking dumb. Like, everyone knew he was married. Like, why would I stalk Undertaker's wife when my wife is hot? Like, that doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? So he didn't know there was heat between the two companies. And he realizes, as he did in WCW, that he fought for things tooth and nail. He should have done that in WWE. And the feud ended up doing nothing for him. It sucked, the feud between him and Taker. And obviously, he kind of realized after a while that things would never really go his way in WWF. But he did love his WrestleMania 18 match, he says, with Christian. He was like twice as old as him, but they were still having kick-ass matches, including a WrestleMania in Canada, which is cool. He wishes he could have worked with The Rock in the People's Champion versus the People's Champion feud, for obvious reasons. He wishes he could have worked with Steve in WWE as well as Shawn Michaels. Those all would have been bucket list matches for him. He talks about how the Hall of Fame ring, the WWE Hall of Fame ring, and his first world title win actually comes second behind the resurrection of Jake Roberts. I don't know if he's talking about the documentary that he did or just kind of helping Jake as far as like his personal accomplishments and how much they mean to him. But yeah, he actually says that he plans on doing a podcast with Jake and Conrad Thompson. I don't know if that was public news before this came out. Maybe it was. He said, we might first start airing episodes in December. I haven't heard anything about that. Maybe I've just been out of the loop, but they're going to be calling it DDP Snake Pit. And yeah, so he also talks about how the Hall of Fame induction to WWE's Hall of Fame, that is, meant everything to him. He recalls the conversation that he had with Triple H over the phone call from him, and how, because they were filming for his DVD, so kind of getting that phone call, and he kind of realized halfway through what Triple H was asking and what he wanted out of it, or what he was going for with it, and it really blew him away when he said that. But anyway, so he talks about his relationship with Eric Bischoff, and he kind of gets emotional talking about the relationship. They've had their ups and downs, but Bischoff, at the end of the day, always protected him, and that's never really, that's never been, he's never forgotten that. That's always meant the world to him, so he gets emotional talking about that. And then to kind of close out here, he talks about his involvement in the Guardians of Justice Netflix series coming out, I think, in January, and he feels it's going to be something special. So that was it for this episode. I thought it was great. Again, it kind of felt like a conversation between two old friends. There's a lot of old stories that we've heard before from DDP and documentaries and in books and stuff like that and various other forms of media. But it's a lot of fun. It's 90 minutes of pure fun between two old friends, and I would recommend checking it out on Peacock when you get a chance this holiday season. So with that being said, guys, thanks for checking out the video. I appreciate it. Be sure to subscribe, like, comment, share, all that stuff. I greatly appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your Christmas Eve, guys. I'm Graham G.S. Matthews. We'll be back with more videos in the days to come as we close out 2021, and I'll catch your ass down the road.